Welcome to Practically Christian. I'm Luke, and I'm here with my wife Janelle.
Hi guys.
And my friend Jake.
Hey.
We share conversations that help you know Jesus more deeply and follow him more faithfully. The truth is, no one has arrived at Christ-likeness. To grow in that direction, we believe you need authentic relationships and biblical theology applied to your everyday life. We hope that you're encouraged to grow and to live out the biblical truths that we're going to discuss on this episode. So let's get practical and dive into a conversation about wrath.
Last week, we talked about envy, and as we've been walking through the 7 deadly sins. And one of the weird things about envy is that we talked about how, jealousy isn't always bad, and there can be a positive aspect to it. And envy is kind of like the negative aspects of jealousy. Today, we're kind of in a weird spot because wrath, as a word, can be positive and negative. And there's not like a positive word for wrath and a negative word for wrath. Sometimes it's just used in a positive sense and in a negative sense. And one of the ways that we can see this is that we actually see God, the Old Testament especially, but also the New Testament talks about God's wrath.
Yeah, and it's not a negative thing.
And it's not a negative thing. It's it's a positive thing, though it is experienced very negatively for the people that it's aimed at. So where do you see, or how do you see, God having wrath in a positive way?
I think it's all tied together with the idea of justice. Mm-hmm. So if God is just and he sees wrongdoing, his reaction to wrongdoing is going to be the righteous anger, of a just God. So I see them as just having to do with justice and God's goodness and in his interaction with a broken and fallen and sinful world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the drive to fix things and make them right and make people right. Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the righting of wrongs.
And the defending of the weak too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because usually wrongs, this isn't always the case, but usually wrongs are perpetrated against the weaker party.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the child getting abused by the parent and not the other way around.
Yeah.
Do you see any other ways that wrath would be a positive thing when God does it, or God having wrath in a positive way?
It's similar to what Janelle said, but I think it's just what wrath brings us to. The other side of wrath is that state of justice or well-being or peace. We experience that too, where when things are wrong between us and someone else, you have to go through the conflict to get to the state of restoration. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's positive in what it can bring about and accomplish. Mm-hmm. That's a desirable state on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about in a little bit as we keep going. It's about how God's wrath is very slow. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I could even say slow than quick. It's often phrased as the idea God is slow to anger. And we see when the Israelites are in Egypt, God is I'm going to have my wrath upon the Moabites in the land. But we're going to wait 400 years until that wrath happens. Mm-hmm. Where God seems to, God's wrath is not, it's most often not retributive. It's not I'm going to punish you because you've been bad. But often it's this is the way to put things right.
Mm. Yeah, I think of it as he's under control. He doesn't lose self-control. And I think that's where we usually associate human wrath with the sense of losing control.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And just acting out of those feelings.
Yeah, and just a reactionary response to something that someone doesn't like or is wrong. Mm-hmm. But then I think that humans have a tendency to sin in their anger instead of...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're actually going to go to that kind of idea right now. So we're going to go to Ephesians 4:26 through 27, where it says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." So what do you think it looks like for someone to be angry and not sin. And you were kind of starting on this idea, Janelle. It's like, what does it look like for a human to be angry but not sin?
Yeah, I mean, I think they maintain a self-control in the midst of their feelings, even if their feelings are very intense. I think they make a choice about what they're going to respond with in their anger instead of that reactionary, which feels like there's no control and there's no intention behind it. It's just a lashing out. So intentional response and engagement with the thing that caused the wrath versus it just being reactionary.
Yeah, and this is coming to mind probably because I'm really bad at it, but I think biblically too there is something to dissociating the person from their actions or the situation. Like, I know people have problems with the saying like love the sin or hate the sin, but I do think there is a fundamental truth to like trying to separate those. And so good anger is when you're mad at the wrongdoing, not the person, where it's not like...
See, and I wouldn't say that you're not mad at the person because the person is the reason why the wrongdoing happened. I would say that there's love for the person in tandem with the anger.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's almost when they say like apathy is the opposite of love. It's like you wouldn't be angry. Like, let's say your kid is doing bad things and you're angry about it. If you didn't care about your kid, you wouldn't be angry. So there's like a care there. But I think it's like if it's out of balance with your love and if it's expressed in a way that's not actually constructive to the life of that child.
Yeah. So would you say like good anger is when like love is there too? And maybe bad anger is when there's hate there instead of the love?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think there's probably versions of unhealthy anger in the context of love mixed with other things. So I would say it's probably more nuanced than just that, but I would say that if you have anger and hate, that's obviously not the kind of love that God wants us to have for our enemies.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I try and think of like good anger, I just think of it as like for the person's good. Where you are angry because the things they've done have messed with them or your relationship with them or them and someone else, but like you're driven by your desire for things to be better for them and for that situation. You're not driven by like just that madness or that emotion. And
So I think the interesting part about the second part of that verse is it ends with, do not give the devil a foothold.
Yeah.
And Paul seems to connect giving the devil a foothold to letting the sun go down on your anger. How do you think that could be a foothold, or what do you think Paul's trying to get across there?
I don't know if this is all of it, but I think there is like divisiveness is very dangerous. Like it might even be the same set of verses where it talks about don't grieve the Holy Spirit, but in the context, it's all about like don't let division exist in the church family. So I think giving the devil a foothold is like letting divisiveness stew. Broken relationships just kind of sit in that state.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like letting something, like I think of like a wound, letting a wound fester is like enclosing the yucky stuff on the inside and letting that have this nice warm space to grow and multiply versus coming out and, dealing with the thing that was the problem, even if that's a painful process.
Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of I think like maybe the idea of like the not letting the sun go down on your anger is kind of like when you move from one day to the next in an angry space, you kind of like choose like this is how it's going to be now, in some sense, where you're like, I don't like instead of like I'm going to like finish this and deal with this. It's like it's not necessarily about the sun going down, but about like this is my new normal, is being angry at this person, this is a problem, and I think in some sense it feels kind of like grudge holding. Kind
Where
of
there's
idea.
no solution.
Yeah.
It's just meant to just continue forever.
Yeah. And maybe kind of like the unhealthy, like this happens a lot in like families that are like either have an unhealthy tendency toward or just very unhealthy, is like if we all just don't talk about it for 3 months, then it's fine.
Yeah.
And then we can like be friends again after it. It's kind of like the time heals all wounds kind of like lie, in the sense of like, I'm angry, but if I just never talk about it, and then like we'll be okay in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And usually it just lashes back out stronger
Some other
next
time.
something similar happens. Yeah.
Or something that reminds you of that thing that's even not similar, and you're like, this always happens.
Yeah.
Here's my list of grievances that you have not addressed in 8 years.
That you didn't know about.
That you didn't know about, of
I
course.
will say,
Yeah.
I've heard some people say, like, they tried to follow this verse verbatim, and, like, for instance, they were, like, a married couple, and they had a fight, and they were, like, not going to sleep until they worked it out.
We can't sleep until this is real.
And it's like they're getting progressively more tired and less competent to, like, actually have a mature conversation about it. It's like, that's not necessarily what it's meaning is, like, don't sleep until you resolve your issue. But I think, like you said, Jake, it's like the choosing to not let this be a marker forever. And like, and saying, you know, for instance, we might, if we were in that situation having a fight, which we haven't done in the evening in general, but if we weren't able to resolve it that night, to say, like, let's talk about it tomorrow at lunch or tomorrow at dinner or whatever. So, like, where you almost...
You're not okay with it just being unresolved forever.
Yeah. You're not just stuffing it, like you were saying, with the family dynamics, where people just don't talk about it for months and months, and then it just comes back up randomly.
Yeah, and I think the next place we're going to go to, I think, kind of gets to that idea a little bit. We can kind of explore a little bit more. I'm going to read Psalm 4. The whole thing, it's 8 verses, but I just want to let you know that it says, this is for the director of music with stringed instruments. So as I read this, if you want to imagine like someone plucking a guitar behind the words, that's up for you to do. It'll make the experience better. So this is from David. Answer me when I call to you, O my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Be merciful to me and hear my prayer. How long, O men, will you turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call to him. In your anger, do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and trust in the Lord. Many are asking, who can show us any good? Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. You have filled my heart with greater joy than when their grain and new wine abound. I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. So there's a few different like connection points there, but specifically verse 4, it says, in your anger do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. How do you think this can help us understand anger and wrath, and how we can do it healthily versus unhealthily?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like the search your hearts and be silent makes me think of what I think of as the opposite of that is like the person who's like almost building themselves up in anger, where they're just like ruminating on it, kind of like we talked about with envy, but doing it with anger, like, and they did this, and how dare they, and like, why would they do that? They must be like this, and where like you're building up instead of assessing silently, searching your heart, like why did I get so offended at that, and what's going on with me that.
Yeah, I appreciate the idea. It's like the search your heart is not focused on what made you be angry, right? It's like, it's not like search the incident for what went wrong. It's like search your own heart.
Yeah.
Why are you angry? Kind of idea.
What do you think, Janelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have what they would in psychology stuff say triggers. Like we have things that irritate us more than other things, and everyone's different on that based on their history and their personality. So I do think it's wise to know your triggers and to observe them, you know, and to be able to like identify that your feelings have something to do with you and not just with them. I just think of like taking that pause, because what you're doing in your bed when you're thinking all alone is like you're taking a pause to think through. And I feel like a lot of times when anger is expressed in unhealthy ways in human relationships, there is no pause. it's almost, there's either the ruminating on it in an unhealthy way, and that's not a pause, that's just like a building up, or it's like an immediate response, which is an unhealthy response and not well contemplated.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that actually kind of leads into our next thing, which is talking about like two kinds of wrath that take place. One of them is kind of like the barrier grudge holding anger, right? Like kind of like the seething, like letting it just ruminate forever. And the other is like the explosive side of things, and where like you blow up. And interestingly, both of these show a lack of self-control. Yeah. It's like I'm not controlling how I'm thinking, and I'm not controlling what I'm doing. And so which one do you think would be more detrimental to the church body?
So just to give everyone a visual, a long time ago I taught this in youth group, but the object lesson I came up with stuck with me. So you might not like this and you can argue against it if you want, but the one I came up with was like some people are like a volcano. Yep. It builds up and then blows up, and other people are like a wildfire. Yep. And they're both destructive. Yeah. They're coming from a different place. Yeah. Or the anger is coming out in a different way.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a little bit of contrast between what you said, because you were talking about like an explosion, but that's not the volcano, that's the wildfire.
Interesting.
Right?
Maybe.
Because you said like you either like not controlling your actions and you're just exploding all over the place. Yeah. Which would be the wildfire.
Yeah. Versus
the seething, which is kind of the volcano. It might explode, it might not, but it's very
maybe the volcano, I should clarify. Yeah, maybe it could be a inactive volcano, but it's still seething and stuff's happening.
It's like waiting, So what do you think is like, either grudge holding or exploding?
So this is my thought. I think Christians who tend toward the seething, quiet anger tend to think they're being more mature. Because they aren't exploding.
They don't have the external markers.
Yeah, and people don't necessarily see what's going on. And I think that they can carry things on for a much longer time, and maybe there's some gossip that goes on and some other detrimental actions that are not yelling at the person that made them angry, but that are kind of like going out sideways. And I think that can be incredibly destructive, and it can be coded in spiritual language, and because it's not instantaneous reactions, people can think that they can be more deceived. Whereas I think someone who explodes, everyone saw it, it's all out there for everyone to see, and that it was immature or not handled right is like part of the initial assessment of that. So I think there's like, they're both incredibly damaging. I'm not saying like there's one that's better or worse. I think they're just different responses, but I do think one of them is more deceptive.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as you, as someone who is a seether. Maybe it's because I see all the problems with that. But I do think, like you said, there can be a false attribution of maturity there when there isn't. And then plus, too, like when someone does explode in anger, at least you can deal with it and identify what's going on, where did this come from, and let's work for resolution. Whereas if it's just seething and invisible, then you can't deal with it.
I will say, in my experience, and I'm more of the exploder, wildfire type of person, who's like, I'm annoyed, here's my annoyance, like immediately.
Here's all of it. Yeah.
I do think people in my camp tend to explode and run away. Yeah. So they don't necessarily do all the follow-up, and they might explode and then move churches. Or, you know what I mean? Like where they're not maturing.
So it can be dealt with, but then oftentimes it's not.
But you have to stay. You have to stay in order to deal with it. So I think it can be...
You can't just say your piece and leave.
Or say your piece and not listen. Because I think not everyone who does that notices that they're in the wrong in some way. So I think there's definitely elements on both sides. But I will say, like, as far as the seethers tend to stick around and sometimes make drama. And
so volcano / seether, wildfire / exploder. What do you, Jake?
I'm probably the exploder kind of idea more often. Now, I think it's funny because I asked this question to my young adults group, and they all got really mad at me because they were like, they're both bad. And I was like, yes. I learned this from Luke when I was in youth group, is that you ask questions that have no right answer because it makes people think. And they were like, well, that's dumb. And so obviously I think both of these are very damaging. I think it's kind of like that thing of it actually depends on how long the seething goes on for to be which one is more damaging.
Interesting.
Because if the explosion is like 100 damage, right? And seething is 1 damage a day. Well, depends on how long that seething goes on for. But if that seething goes on for 200 days, you now have more damage. But if it's 5, then it's less. Where anyway, so I think, and one of the things that was brought up is that especially in relationships that are not church relationships with family, especially marriage relationships, that the explosion is often more dangerous because it causes fear. Where it's and kind of in the sense of there's not a runaway. It's it is more. There's more fear involved because it's like someone holding a grudge. And it's honestly there's also fear in that of oh my gosh, am I gonna trip this grudge again? But it's there's less fear of danger, often for the other people around them when the explosion is a serious explosion. So I'd say that one probably has more ability to be dangerous or negative.
I just think explosions mean different things for different people.
Yeah.
So if it accompanies with violence and breaking items and those, that's a different.
Or emotional abuse even.
Yeah, emotional abuse, that's a different level than
just yelling kind of idea.
Yeah, or
I'm so frustrated at this thing.
So I think the same thing could be true of this either. I think they could be passive aggressively doing all kinds of stuff, or they could
poison
just
their spouse,
or they could just be feeling crappy on the inside about something for a while and then get over it. So it's it just really depends on
the level.
What sin is coming out of it.
Yeah, it's true. Though I do think, and we were talking about some of the deception of the seething, self-deception. The self-deception I've seen on the other side is that often the person who explodes feels a lot better afterwards. They're wow.
Well, everyone else feels worse.
Well, everyone else feels it's wow, that was so good for me to get all that anger out, and now I'm no longer angry, and everyone else is and now we're all scared, and that could be the self-deception of I have to explode, or what am I supposed to do? Just keep it inside of me?
Yeah.
Not saying that everyone does that, but I think it can be a deception involved.
It can definitely be a deception too, even not just in a relational sense, but in a professional sense. I once heard someone who was an exploder, and then they were basically being encouraged to go to counseling and learn different ways of relating because someone who loved them was this is unhealthy, and the response was but it works. I get results.
Yeah, I get mad, and then other people do what I wanted them to do, and they don't do bad again.
Yeah. And I was wow, that could be true. But those are the results you should want.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, that's a consideration of what total results, because you're getting certain results. If I wanted to parent in a certain way, my house could be totally clean all the time.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. But also my relationship with my children would not be awesome. So it's the total result, it has to include the relationships involved. And I think if you're saying I get the results, you're treating people like machines.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Instead of treating them like full humans with feelings, and they're taking that home. If you're their boss and you exploded on them, and then they got their work done, that's affecting them, and that might be affecting their families and their lives in deeper ways.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think it's we're not able to fully assess the results of our actions, and that's why we are called to just be faithful and do the growing things and following God in faithfulness, because we aren't in the position of God to see what all the results are to make an assessment that's correct.
Yeah, so I'm going to read from James 1:19 through 21. It says, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." So I've heard people use this before and be like, see, you should just never be angry, because man's anger doesn't bring about righteousness. What I think is actually going on here is it's contrasting the lack of self-control anger of like that often we experience as humans versus God being slow to anger. And it's not saying don't be angry, it's saying imitate God in your anger. Be slow to anger like God is.
Don't be reactionary.
Don't be reactionary and uncontrolled in your anger. And I think this is really funny, so I just have to bring this up because I have to bring it up every time I talk about God's anger, because it's hilarious that in the Old Testament, the idiom that's underneath God is slow to anger.
Yeah, like if you got verses that say
God
the
is
Lord is slow to anger.
Yeah.
What it actually says in the original.
In Hebrew, it says God is long in the nose. And it's because they were like the physical sign of getting angry is your face gets red. And if you have a long nose, it takes longer for your face to get red.
For the redness to go all the way to
the tip of the nose. And so
Like
you're not
Pinocchio.
And so you're not fully angry until your face is fully red. So if you have a long nose, slow to anger.
Yeah.
That's literally what's going on. It's just so funny to me. But and that's kind of like a physical description of what it means to be slow to anger. So for you, not what does it look like when someone is slow to anger, but what does it look inside when you practice being slow to anger? What is the internal actions or internal feelings and thoughts that take place of being slow to anger?
I mean, this isn't totally internal because usually there's something triggering. Like, I do feel the emotion of anger when, if I'm doing things right, when I try and do that reflection. For me, it's not just on my bed, in my heart, like the psalm says, but it's often like with a journal and pen and kind of reflecting on like, why did that make me so mad? What's going on? Actually, this whole time I've been thinking about, I had a conversation this morning where I was angry and there was someone who needed to be challenged on something and I did challenge them. And that part of it was okay, but I was also mad. And so I'm still wondering why that was so triggering for me. Yeah. And I haven't sat down with my journal yet, and I probably should.
Yeah.
But like reflective, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Reflecting on what's going on in your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone who's slow to anger, again, it comes back to the love that you have for that person. Like, I think if you maintain that mentality of this person who's infuriating to me is a person of value and worth, a person loved by God, it just takes certain tones of, you know, the hatred aspect away from the equation, because you can't just be like, they're evil, they're like Satan, you know, they're a person who's broken and they probably, I don't know, I think part of it is I grew up with foster kids in the home, and they would often be kind of naughty children or whatever, but I also like grew up with that perspective of like, you don't know what they've been through, you don't know where their behavior is coming from, you don't know how they're feeling, like you don't know all of the things, like you kind of have to have that humility about your interaction, and a lot of times I think in our selfishness we tend to make it all about us. In our selfishness, if I'm offended, it's because that person tried to offend me and it's all about me, and it's like really they were doing something that offended me, but it may not even have been aimed to offend. So yeah, I think part of the reflective aspect would be just to walk humbly, in the sense of you don't know what you don't know. You don't. I think sometimes as a parent too, I see like if my kid's saying something really rude or whatever, I'm like, well, I see all these different things. I see that they are experiencing disappointment right now, that they had a hard day at school, that they didn't sleep well, that they're recovering from an illness, like all these different aspects that come together. and I am able to see a bigger picture as the parent. But I think so many times when we get angry, it's with someone who we don't have as much perspective on their struggles and their life.
In some sense, give the other person a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is, I think, anger is a legitimate response to when something wrong happens, or to perceived wrong, even if it's not wrong, right? Like if I perceive that someone has done something wrong, even if like my perception is off, it's still like a legitimate response because I believe that something wrong has happened. So what does it look like for you as a person to make space in your relationships and in like your personal like actions and the way that you think and live for those perceived wrongs to be talked about and to be like dealt with inside and externally? Does that make sense? Like, what does it look like to make a space where that anger can actually be talked about?
Basically just trying to express healthy anger.
Yeah.
Getting
well, because it's like, I think often, and this goes towards especially like when like we stuff stuff down, and or like stuff down and then and often also explode, is that people feel like that's like either there isn't a way to express it, there isn't a place to express this anger, so I'm just going to keep it to myself, or there's not a legitimate way for me to express it, so my only option is to bowl through it and blow up, right? So what does it look like to create in your relationships space for healthy anger or healthy conversations about anger or what's making someone angry?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have a ton of modeling in this area in our culture because we're told that it's just either you're wrong and you shouldn't have gotten angry, or you're right and your anger should explode all over everybody. Like, it's kind of like the extremes, I feel like. There's not much consideration for that being a person of peace in the midst of your anger.
Yeah, I'm not on the receptive side. Like, if someone comes to me and like, Luke, I'm really mad that you did blank. I don't always do this well, but I think that the right reaction is to like you said, like that reaction of anger is legitimate, even if their perception was wrong. So like starting with that, I mean, like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, like almost identify with that feeling and affirm that before you respond to the action of the situation. Like, I don't know, I think there's something towards like moving towards the person is something you've been coaching me on, Janelle. Instead of like backing away, like moving in and be like, wow, tell me more. Why did that happen? Where did that hurt come from? Like, trying to almost dig into it, even though internally I'm like, and in my mind, I jump to that self-defensiveness, but trying to be open to like, is there something here I do need to own? And what is that? That's not on the putting it out there side, that's on the reception side, though. Good. But I'd like to think if you respond that way consistently, then it does make space in relationships for that to happen.
Yeah, I think part of it is to, and it can be very difficult, but like to let someone know, like, that you're upset and that you're gonna take time to calm down. Or like, I'm gonna, like, it feels weird because a lot of people feel like that, like there can be a lot of like hurt that even happens in that, or like perceived stuff, but I think if you do it well, it's like, hey, like, that made me very upset, I'm not in the right place to talk about it right now, but can we talk about that tomorrow at this time, or and not engaging with it necessarily while you're still heated.
Yeah.
Gaining space personally, not so that it can like boil over anyway, or that you can forget about it, but so that you can like be more removed from the emotion ness of it to actually get at the heart of what's going on.
Yeah. And like, you've named that there's a problem.
Yes.
and you've expressed that you want to.
Yeah, so you can't get away from it, or like you can't like be like, wow, it's just not worth talking about it anymore, or like you can't like bury it on accident, or
I mean, I was taught like the rule of like, write the email now, don't send it till tomorrow. And I actually have done that a few times where I'm like, da, 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 and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna save this and look at it again tomorrow, and tomorrow comes like, wow.
Yeah.
I am so glad I followed that advice.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And I don't know, honestly, like 7-8 times out of 10 I don't send the email at all, or if I do, it's not
Very
the
different.
same email.
Yeah, I think another one is like when you feel other people getting angry, is to respond slowly. And this is especially true, I think, like over like email or over like online things. But I think you can also do it in person too. Whether that be like if someone like expresses a lot of anger to just like legitimately just say, okay, that's a lot for me to take in right now. I'm just going to think about that for like 3 minutes. And then just kind of like slow the roll down. Whether that be like if someone sends you an angry email, not to respond immediately. And to like even if you're not angry, but to not respond immediately because they're probably still angry. And to like kind of be like, I will respond to this in 4 hours when I know that person has hopefully had some time to calm down. And then because if I feel the anger in their thing, no matter what I send.
Yeah. Although I wonder if me and you are similar personality wise in this way, because Janelle, you've said before of like, we can't like pause a fight or a conflict. Like,
I think for me, I just in the marriage context, I was like, you can't just leave. Like if you went on a walk by yourself right after we had conflict because you needed to cool down, I would feel abandoned and like I would have all these horrible things going on in my mind while you're gone and getting your mind right. You know, like it's like we at least have to physically be together.
Yeah.
Or get to a point where it's not like, I'm so mad, I'm leaving. Like that would not be okay for
Yeah, well that's why in a conversation is probably not the best idea to like get up and be like, I need time and walk away. But like I think in some sense you could be like, I'm just gonna like sit here and think about it for a couple minutes.
And I think every relationship is so different.
True.
And I probably would be different now that we've been married for so long versus like, you know, that first year when we were still figuring out how to be married, you know. So I just feel like and relationships are
it's very
contextualized to the people who are in those relationships. So it's just I think a safe space, when you talked about making a safe space, I think so many people in their family life growing up or in their work life, they have not had safe spaces for conflict. So conflict triggers, this is not safe.
Yeah.
Immediately, regardless of what you try to do to put in place. So I think, honestly, it's the people that we have relationship with over the long haul that we have little conflicts with over time and experience. We had conflict, we made it through, we still love each other. If you experience that over and over, I think it's going to form you and your relationship into a safe space. But I think you just kind of have to tackle it and mess up and then talk about that. You know, like all of those little interactions and not try to like be perfect because it's not. It's almost like I think if you seek perfection in dealing with your anger, you're not going to deal with your anger because it's going to be messy. So.
What do you think about this? Just I'm playing with an idea of like, this is obviously doesn't work very well if like you're the one who has perceived the wrong, but if someone else has perceived the wrong, even if you're not sure it's like a correct perception of what's going on, would it work to apologize and also be like I'm sorry that happened or that I did that? Can I have a few minutes to think about it? Or like in some sense, like would that make it feel like there's less relational breakage of like someone needing more time to be like?
Would it make it more safe?
Would it make it more safe for them to apologize regardless of if they believe that you're correct in your perception? You know what I mean? I'm just like playing around with it.
I don't know. I just feel like then it's not a legitimate apology because you're not actually sorry.
But you're sorry that the relational breakage is happening. I don't know, like it's like...
I'm sorry that you feel hurt.
Well, don't say it like that.
But that's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be authentic to both. Like, I think for an apology to be an apology, it needs to reflect your heart of apology. So I don't think it's okay to just apologize. I think you could always just say, you know what, I really care about our relationship. And the fact that that you're upset with me is upsetting to me.
Yeah.
So like I want to think about this for a little bit, and like I just want you to know before we even have this conversation, I really care about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think that needs to be an apology.
Yeah.
I think the issue is that we use the word "I'm sorry" to express sorrow and to express repentance. And really, technically, it should only be used to express repentance. And so I think what's going on is like socially, just the way we use the words "I'm sorry" can mean like I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. That's got to be so hard. But really, we probably should say something like, "Oh man, I can't imagine." Like, like I feel for you so much.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I think we should be able to express those feelings of like empathy without saying "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
Ideally.
That's fair.
I just know for me, if it's not legitimate, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah,
like,
that's
I
fair.
don't want to hear a fake sorry.
There's been several times where I'm like, Janelle, I was hurt by this, and she's like, well, let me tell you why I did that.
That's true. Like, let me explain away your feelings.
And then I'm like, but I still feel this way.
Yeah, I think that the rough part for me is like, and then this is what gets me like really like worried about like that kind of thing is like, what if I'm like, hey, this is like how I'm feeling, and then the person is like, well, this is why I did that, and I'm still in the spot of like, I still think that's wrong, like, and you know, like that's where I'm like, I don't know how to navigate that all the way without everyone kind of taking more time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like if I'm emotionally charged, in like even like in a minor way, if I say, hey, this is what this was not okay, and then someone goes, well, this is why I did that. No matter where I was, that's gonna, especially if I feel like I'm right, I'm gonna like, that's gonna elevate me right there, kind of thing. And so it's
because
like,
you don't feel seen as a person.
well, like, but like no, because it feels like a roadblock. Like, could you imagine like in this situation of like if it's legitimate, perfect, but if it's not, then it's like, I don't know where to go. Like, we have hit a dead end in 3 sentences. I don't know if that makes sense. Because if it's like if I was like incorrect or like your thing made sense, then it's like, okay, perfect, good. This is. But if it's like not, it's like if like theoretically if someone was like, hey, you cheated on me, this was bad, and they're like, well, it's because you weren't giving me enough attention. It's like, where do we go from here? Like, that's an extreme example to try to but like,
there is a subtext to our conversation, and I think it actually is important with anger, because anger can be rooted in like relational or emotional difficulties, and also like practical conflicts. So I'm thinking of the difference between like some kind of relational wound.
Like, you said this and it hurt my feelings.
Yeah, there you go. Versus like we're working on a project and we're miscommunicating because I was picturing something different and I didn't communicate that well to you. Like there's a problem difference. Outside. Yeah, there's a problem, and like the anger should be directed at the problem.
Yeah.
And I do think conflict sometimes can happen or worsen when the two people involved are thinking you're having the other type of
different conversation. Yeah.
Like, those are different conversations. If it's like...
Yeah, I will say, too, I feel like a lot of times we don't identify the conversation that we're about to have, and that springs it on the other person.
Yes.
So for you, you've been thinking, especially with Seethers, because they've thought through it for a long time.
We've contemplated on our bed like the psalm says to do.
Yes.
So they've been contemplating. They're like, I decided I need to have a conversation about this. And that's a healthy thing to want to have a conversation about it. And then it's like, surprise, here's this conversation that you weren't expecting. Jake's laughing.
I know. I'm laughing at what Luke said because I just thought it was so funny. Like... Sorry.
That's the self-righteous.
Well, yeah.
We're following the Bible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but I understand where you're getting at. It's like you have to like kind of be like, in some sense, like warm people up to the conversation
Yeah, or
or let them
yeah.
know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this is not about anger entirely, but so I was talking to about like one of their problems in their romantic relationship is like one of like the guy would think about like all of the like ways that they could improve their relationship, and then over like a month, and they would like be getting coffee and they'd be like, hey, I've been thinking about these things, and the other person is like, oh my gosh, is our relationship about to fall apart because you've been thinking about 500 ways to improve our relationship? And he's like, no, I've just been thinking about all these things. What do you think about them? And it's like,
Yeah.
And I think we can do that in our anger too. Like,
Yeah, or people are just mismatched in what their expectation is for the conversation.
Yeah. And or I think sometimes, especially with anger, it's like if we're being slow to anger, sometimes we don't give other people the chance to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say, Janelle, like, what would be the ideal then? Like for a seether who's trying to be healthy, they have processed it. They're like, okay, I'm ready to like this needs to be addressed, talked about.
Yeah.
Like, how would you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to identify that you have a difficult conversation that you'd like to have with them on topic such and such. So it's not just this mysterious black hole. Like let's say you have a spouse or a friend who has a problem with anger and they've exploded on you a few times. Maybe you say, hey, at some point I really want to talk to you about the relationship dynamics we have because of your anger. That it's been hurtful to me and I'd like to talk to you about that sometime. When would be a good time? You know, so that they know what you're talking about, and then they kind of come in.
They can prepare, they know.
Yeah, they're emotionally ready to have that conversation.
No, it's good.
So, in our goal to have podcasts that are like 35 minutes or less, we were on track for that until we started talking about how to actually have the relationship part of it. So we're going to close here with the application of it would basically to practice being slow to anger, to take those times, and that doesn't mean like, I think it's very like stereotypical and not helpful at all to be like count to 20 before like in your anger. It's like that's not actually like helpful, or at least never has been for me. But like being more introspective, being more caring about the other people involved, and taking the time to process your anger instead of exploding, but also taking the time to process it and actually process it instead of just shoving it down. So to practice over the next 2 weeks, being slow to anger, and some of the things that we've talked about today. So I'm going to close this in prayer, and then we can all go not be angry, and Luke's going to go journal about his anger.
That's right.
So, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time to get together and have this conversation. Help us and everyone listening to navigate anger in our lives. We know that you've given us a sense of anger and wrath so that we can deal with the negative things in the world, with the sin in the world, and that it's good to have wrath against sin and against people being hurt by others. But Lord, help us to be wise in our administration of anger and wrath, and be able to navigate the anger that we have in our relationships as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.